Welcome, and thank you for listening in to Session 2 of Women's Sex and Marriage. This is the second discussion in a three-part series, and all three videos and accompanying worksheets can be found on my website, amywellmanwhite.com. Go to the tab on Women's Sex and Marriage and choose the worksheet for Session 2. I will let you know when to pause the video and complete the worksheet as instructed. You may prefer to listen to the entire video first and then go through the worksheet on your own afterward. The worksheet is intended to help you gain additional insight into where you are in your journey and to identify steps for growth. Well, in our first session, we identified our sexual self as one dimension of our whole self, just like the emotional, physical, and spiritual, and should not be compartmentalized or separated from the rest of us. Our goal is to fully know, embrace, and be able to express our sexuality in rewarding and healthy ways. What this means is that we will be able to celebrate through sexual expression the intimate, loving relationship that we have with our husbands. We explored the significance of accepting who we are and loving ourselves with all of our strengths and weaknesses, knowing that we are made in God's image. We are worthy of love, respect, and are significant for that reason alone. This lays the foundation for experiencing our sexual selves in the best way possible. We began to evaluate the various messages we've learned, either through what was said to us or what we experienced, and the necessity of challenging those beliefs which are false. Today, we're going to dig a little deeper and identify barriers that can hinder our efforts to know, enjoy, and express our sexuality. Well, throughout our lives, we may encounter barriers that can get in the way of experiencing pleasure through sexual expression. These barriers are common for many women and can be overcome. Let's start with some physical barriers that can inhibit our sexual fulfillment. Here is what one woman says: I get bladder infections from intercourse, and that has always put a damper in my enthusiasm. Well, we can imagine how this woman feels when she thinks about making love. This is an example of a physical condition that, if left untreated, can certainly impact sexual expression. PMS and vaginismus are two other barriers rooted in physical causes. 39% of women experience some physical discomfort 3 to 10 days before menstruation due to hormonal shifts. This is known as premenstrual syndrome and can definitely impact desire and interest in having sex. For other women during sex, they can experience painful involuntary spasms of the vaginal wall. Sometimes this occurs even when just using tampons. This is called vaginismus, and again will certainly impact sexual desire and pleasure. Other sources that can contribute to painful sex are consequences from childbirth, dryness, and inflammatory conditions. Some women experience migraines after orgasm, and again, this will certainly get in the way of interest in sex. Symptoms and complications from sexually transmitted diseases can impact the sexual experience. And finally, medications can have side effects, which can change a woman's libido and decrease her interest in having sex. If you identify any physical barriers that get in the way of expressing your sexual self, there is help. Consider consulting a physician to determine a correct diagnosis and specific steps to help you effectively manage or eliminate your symptoms. Well, please go to your worksheet and respond to each item under number 1. Well, life is dynamic and things are constantly changing, and this can impact our sexual desire, our interest in sex, and sexual fulfillment. As an example, think about life as a newlywed. When marriage begins, it will be a learning experience to understand and relate to one another well. As newlyweds, a rhythm and comfort level in communicating likes and dislikes takes time in all areas of life, including our sexual preferences. This process will always be a work in progress. There may also be differences between a husband and wife in the sexual area as well. We want to work toward lovingly understanding one another and be cautious not to criticize or apply pressure when these differences present themselves. We will be talking more about this in session 3, but like any other area of life, we need to invest in this process of knowing and understanding one another if we want to see change, growth, and a positive outcome. It takes being intentional and working together. Did you catch that? It takes work. Good sex is more than mere chemistry, attraction, and response. Well, as marriage continues, careers and children can add stress to the marriage. New demands and responsibilities can impact our schedules, energy, and interest in sex. If we are caring for others, especially children in the home and possibly aging or ailing parents, plus additional responsibilities at work or in our community activities, self-care, including adequate sleep, may go by the wayside. Our interest and desire for sex may diminish as well when this occurs. Sexual expectations from our husbands can begin to feel like one more person needing something from us, but we don't have anything more to give. Positive, direct communication, expressing our needs and setting boundaries, and practicing good self-care are critical during this season of life and marriage. This includes getting sufficient sleep, good nutrition, adequate exercise, and recreative time set apart for refilling our tank when it may be on empty. If our tank is empty, we will not be able to meet the needs of others. Some women have been taught and believe that taking care of ourselves is selfish. Well, taking care of ourselves is not selfish. It equips us to serve those we love because then we're running on all cylinders. We have to take responsibility for ourselves and not expect others to do that. Well, as we enter our 30s and 40s, we will begin to see other changes. This is when perimenopause begins. Our body is transitioning to menopause, which occurs 1 year after the last menstrual cycle. During this time, menstrual cycles may change, either lengthen or shorten, be heavier or lighter, regular or irregular. We may also experience hot flashes, moodiness, sleep problems, vaginal dryness, among other symptoms. These symptoms may continue or intensify as we progress into menopause. The typical age for menopause is 51, but it may be earlier or later. Menopause occurs 1 year after the last menstrual cycle. 50% of women experience changes in their desire or physical ability to respond in menopause. Some exercises can effectively address some of these changes, such as pelvic floor exercises. In the book From Duty to Delight, listed in the resource section on your worksheet on pages 105 to 109, there's some good instructions on pelvic floor exercises you might want to consult. But remember, for many women, this stage of life is a time when sex can be even better than ever. Some women report increased sexual satisfaction and intimacy during this time, even if there's less frequency or intensity in sexual response. During this time, a woman's partner may also experience sexual changes, such as erectile dysfunction or impotency. These challenges can impact a woman's responsiveness too. But here again, there are solutions. Good communication between a husband and wife with their healthcare provider and between one another is essential. Consulting with a physician may be beneficial to discuss hormonal changes and therapies as well. Don't be timid or embarrassed about seeking help. Please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections under item number 2. Next, we'll address emotional barriers. Well, as we all know, life is not always easy. We can go through some rugged valleys along the way. And after difficult situations improve, some of the emotions from what we've experienced may linger. We may carry unresolved emotions such as hurt, fear, sadness, grief, guilt, shame, injustice, and anger. The trouble is, these unresolved emotions don't always stay neatly tucked away in their box. Again, everything impacts everything else, and our sexuality is part of our whole self. These unresolved emotions can inhibit our ability to express our sexuality and create barriers. Well, what might be an example of this idea of unresolved emotions impacting the present? Suppose one of our parents was hurtful, neglectful, or even abusive to us during our growing up years. We become adults and move on, but we've not taken the time or had the opportunity to process these experiences and their impact on our everyday life. When this is true, we can become triggered by something someone says or does in the present. Although the person and the situation are different, the same emotion gets tapped into, whether that is, again, hurt, fear, anger, injustice, maybe even feeling inadequate or stupid. We then respond in a manner that seems more robust than what fits the current situation. Our response is actually an over-response, suggesting something from our past is fueling our present response. Here's an example of what unresolved emotions that get triggered can look like. Suppose a couple has committed to attending an evening meeting at church or some community event. The husband comes home later than he expected, and they're running late. He hurriedly sits down to eat his dinner, which his wife had waiting for him on the table. She enters the room and encourages him to hurry as time is running short. He immediately is angry and throws the plate against the wall. His response, or we should say his over-response, doesn't fit the situation. His wife was not too pleased, to say the least, with his behavior. When their emotions calm down and they discuss the event, the husband describes how his mother constantly corrected him and pressured him. He was already feeling stressed by being late, and his wife's words added to that. But emotionally, her words felt like his mother was yelling at him again. He had some work to do to differentiate his mom from his wife. His unresolved emotions from things past were triggered in the here and now, and his reaction was an over-response. It was unhealthy and would impact the marriage and their sexual relationship. Please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections under item number 3. Let's next discuss how depression and anxiety can impact our sexuality. 60% of women suffering from depression lose interest in sex altogether, and women have twice the risk of depression as men. Signs of depression include sadness, lack of interest in things we usually enjoy, weight loss or gain, sleeping less or more than average, a lack of energy, and feelings of helplessness to change anything in the world around us to make us feel better. Depression impacts our sexual desire. Anxiety can also impact the expression of our sexual self, which can include feeling pressure to perform, to either have sex at all or to reach orgasm if we are having sex. Depression and anxiety have solutions. These include counseling, lifestyle changes, behavioral interventions, and medication. We have real choices that we can make that will help us get better if we're struggling with anxiety and depression. We don't have to be held captive by these negative emotional dynamics. Well, in addition to depression and anxiety, guilt is a powerful emotion that can definitely impact our sexual selves. Do you find yourself carrying around feelings of guilt about anything past? If you engaged in experiences that you now look back on and regret, it is worth the effort to take care of business if you haven't done so. If you have offended someone, for example, and it's appropriate, apologize and ask for forgiveness. Then seek God's forgiveness and forgive yourself. God's forgiveness is immediate. As far as the east is from the west, so far are our sins removed from us. Sometimes the consequences of sin last longer, but that's different. We may have to deal with that, but we don't have to keep feeling guilty. God would not have us carry around false guilt, and we don't want to allow it. Guilt can be a powerful emotion that impacts how we see ourselves and our ability to engage fully in sexual expression. Another challenging emotional time is when we lose a loved one. Grief can be all-consuming and can be strong at first, but then it may come in waves. We may think we're doing pretty well and find ourselves crying in the middle of the store. This is normal. Depending on the nature of the relationship we had with the person we lost, the process of working through grief can be long, and sexual interest and responsiveness may vary during this season. Here again, communicating our needs and feelings and working on emotional intimacy and affectionate touch may take extra effort. Well, please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections under item number 4. Next, let's look at some relationship challenges occurring in marriage that can create barriers to sexual expression. 63.1% of women in sexless marriages, no sex at all, rated their marriage as either neutral or unhappy. What is or isn't happening in the bedroom often gives us a window into the status of what's happening in the marriage. Lack of partnership and hurtful communication are 2 barriers that negatively impact a marriage and sexual expression for a couple. Lack of partnership, which is not being included in decision-making, can be powerful. John Gottman has done significant research focusing on marriage and divorce. In other words, what are the behaviors in marriage that can actually lead to divorce? Well, according to Gottman, there is an 81% chance a marriage will self-destruct when power is not shared. When partnership is lacking in the marital relationship, a woman hears the message, you're not necessary, you're not equal, and you're not valued. Let me give you an example. Imagine your husband buys a new $50,000 car and never consulted you. Or perhaps your husband takes a new job, which requires moving across the country. He said yes, without even asking you how you felt about it, knowing you have many family and friends in the area in which you are closely connected to. Well, you get the idea. How might the lack of partnership not only impact a marriage, but a woman's view of herself and sexuality? What might her ability to respond look like in that kind of relationship? Well, hurtful communication is also destructive in the marriage. It creates barriers, and according to John Gottman, is also a predictor of divorce. We want to avoid using things like criticism, being defensive, engaging in what we call stonewalling, which is shutting down emotionally or withdrawing physically, and words of contempt. For example, consider a pattern of defensiveness. Have you ever gone to someone who has hurt you and tried to express what he did to offend you? Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, the person defends why he did what he did. Well, when that happens, we don't feel heard, nor are our feelings validated. Trusting our emotional self to someone who can't take responsibility and make positive changes moving forward is difficult. Now imagine being on the receiving end, but instead of someone lovingly expressing how we have hurt him, he yells at us. He uses harsh language, swearing, name-calling, put-downs, or telling us to shut up. Well, how does that make us feel? And how does that impact our ability to respond sexually? When these patterns exist, couples will need to learn and implement healthier skills to be more responsive and less reactive. For example, Learning how to make I statements instead of you statements is essential in expressing needs, emotions, and expectations while conveying a message that we are for the other person. A new goal of understanding and supporting one another versus winning or losing a battle will create an environment where each person feels safe and valued. Lack of partnership, inadequate communication, poor conflict resolution skills, and not building friendship or pursuing intimacy will impact every aspect of a marriage, including the sexual. Please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections under items number 5 and 6. Well, on a positive note, expressions of affection and love will contribute to creating the climate we need to respond sexually. Some of us like words of affirmation. If our love language is words of affirmation, and your husband is performing acts of service like getting your oil changed, mowing the lawn, you may appreciate those acts, but you may not feel loved. How you like to be loved, how your partner likes to be loved, what makes us feel loved, is an area to explore with your partner. Knowing how to love one another will contribute to creating a positive climate, setting the stage for a wonderful sexual expression. Well, please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections in item number 7. Broken trust in any area, for example, related to finances, acts of adultery, use of pornography, lying, or withholding information, creates significant barriers in a relationship, again, including the sexual. Expressing our sexual self is an intimate and vulnerable experience. When trust is broken, a couple will need to work toward restoring trust before sexual expression will be fully restored and a person can feel able to be vulnerable again. This can take a significant amount of time depending on the offense committed. Professional help may be beneficial in overcoming the impact of the trust that was broken. It is relevant to mention that trust and forgiveness are two separate processes. We may be able to reach the place of offering forgiveness when trust has been broken by a hurtful behavior or hurtful words, but that does not mean we are able to trust the other person and restore them to the place they once were. Trust is a persuasion and is built on evidence. I can't tell you who to trust, and you can't tell me. Therefore, the decision to trust is an individual matter. When trust is broken, it cannot always be restored, and this is not a lack of forgiveness. Some couples also run into trouble in their relationship because they do not have good boundaries. This can impact sexual expression as well. Well, what do we mean by boundaries? By way of example, imagine you're in the place of buying your very first house. You've saved and you waited and you're very excited and you know exactly the kind of house you want. You look at a few and they're not what you had in mind. And then your realtor turns down a street and it's the perfect street, what you've always imagined, and then pulls up to the home that is for sale and you can't believe it. It's even better than what you had envisioned in your mind. You go in and you walk through the house and every room is more perfect than the one before. And you can't believe how it fits what you imagined as your first home. And then your realtor tells you the price of the home and you're shocked. It's lower than what you even budgeted. You step outside the back door to look at the backyard and it looks a little bit different because it looks as if there's one large yard that all the neighbors share along with you. And you comment on it and your realtor says, well, this is a different kind of neighborhood. Everybody shares the backyard. There's no boundaries. How do you feel about that house now? My guess is you're not as interested as you were, and you probably don't even want to buy it. Well, a lack of healthy boundaries in relationships can have the same effect. That can intrude on the intimacy, friendship, and trust that two people share. When we marry, we are to leave and cleave to one another. Now, this does not mean we want to isolate ourselves. We want to have time with friends and families, but we want to have healthy boundaries so there's enough time and energy for a fulfilling marriage, including a good sex life. Lack of healthy boundaries can also appear when there is not a good, healthy work-life balance. The time and energy needed to maintain healthy expression of our sexual self can be compromised when this occurs. For example, if a husband or wife continually bails on date night or cancels vacations or weekend plans because work has needs and necessities they must meet, the impact may be significant. A couple may need to reevaluate these areas and determine if adjustments are required to again instill healthy boundaries so they have time for one another and adequate time for good sex. Please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections in item number 8. Next, we're going to discuss a topic that is sensitive and can be emotional for some people. It's the topic of abuse, whether it occurred before or in marriage. If you have been a victim of abuse, this discussion may trigger thoughts and feelings which can be uncomfortable or even painful. If so, feel free to stop the video and explore this on your own and rejoin us in session 3. You may also want to consider talking to a professional to discuss your responses and create a plan for moving forward. We'll listen to what one woman says. Sometimes my husband and I discuss my father's inappropriate sexual actions with me and wonder if that affects my desire for intercourse now. Once in a while, my husband will do something my father did, and that instantly turns me off. The consequences of abuse on our whole self, including our sexual self, can be extensive. Various criteria contribute to the degree of impact from the sexual abuse. For example, the age at which the abuse occurred, the degree and longevity of trauma, and how friends and family managed the trauma that we incurred. Sexual trauma occurs when there is inappropriate nudity, being fondled, exposure to sex, either verbally or visually, before we are developmentally ready to handle what we see or hear. This can be frightening and traumatic. Of course, any vaginal or anal penetration. Again, it's important to note that rape and sexual assault are acts of violence motivated by anger and rage. Rape often occurs in a home by a friend, acquaintance, a neighbor, relative, or on a date. Physical force and threats are often used, and victims can become immobilized by fear. Sometimes the threats are to hurt them further or to hurt family or friends. Sexual aversion may occur when trauma has occurred from sexual abuse. Negative thoughts and feelings about engaging in anything of a sexual nature can be overwhelming and potent. Being victimized doesn't mean you have to stay a victim. Working with a professional to recover from abuse is highly recommended, as it can be challenging to navigate the journey alone. Abuse does not have to damage us forever. Abuse can happen to us, but does not have to define who we are, including our worth, value, significance, purpose, and identity, including our sexual self and our sexual expression. We want to process any leftover emotions from the event or events that occurred, identify and challenge false beliefs learned from the abuse, and grow into a positive view and expression of our sexual self. Through counseling and, if needed, medical treatment or medication, results from sexual abuse, including sexual aversion, can be changed. It can feel scary, but the effort is worthwhile. Please go to your worksheet and write down your response to all sections in item number 9. Well, what about abuse in marriage? In their book, Enough is Enough, David and William Clark define abuse as a pattern of narcissistic, disrespectful, and harmful behavior exhibited by one person in an intimate relationship. Marital abuse, unfortunately, includes being forced to do something sexual against your will. This is abuse. Marriage does not entitle another person to demand sexual acts or force sexual performance. Abuse can sometimes be coercive rather than direct. A husband might threaten to use pornography, go to strip clubs, or have an affair if his wife does not comply with all of his sexual demands. And women may comply with unwanted sexual demands, sometimes to prevent further types of abuse or violence to self or her children. A woman may also comply with sexual demands and yield to them out of fear that her partner will withhold money and what she and her children need. Sometimes women comply to sexual demands because of distorted biblical teachings. For example, some men refer to a verse in scripture such as "Wives, submit to your husbands," and misuse this text to support the view that meeting a man's sexual needs on demand is biblical and a wife is sinning if she doesn't. Well, these are distortions and are sinful. And a woman wants to understand and challenge these misinterpretations and learn what is healthy as far as what scripture has to say about herself as a woman and her sexuality. If a woman is the victim of abuse in marriage, she needs help to become whole again and to set boundaries in this unhealthy and destructive relationship. The health and wellness of the woman is the priority, not keeping the marriage together. Professional help is recommended as these dynamics are complex and have many layers and may take time to work through. Don't be a lone ranger if this is your situation. Get the help that you need. Well, please go to your worksheet and review item number 10. We live in an era where pornography has become more acceptable and more rampant. Pornography can destroy the sexual relationship in a marriage and the marriage itself. The statement that pornography doesn't hurt anyone is a lie. Pornography creates a huge barrier in a marriage and sexual expression. Did you know that the pornography industry, is one of the biggest drivers of sex trafficking? Pornography devalues men and women. In addition, the use of pornography can spiral out of control because over time, more pornography is needed to reach the same level of arousal. Sex is then extracted from intimacy and people become objects to be used. For example, one couple got heavily into pornography and they stopped having sex with one another altogether. Instead, they watched pornography together and masturbated. They were unable to arouse and respond to one another. They could only be aroused and respond sexually by using pornography. Well, what's the solution? Seeing a woman as someone's mother, sister, niece, daughter, friend, neighbor, rather than making a woman an object to be used for personal sexual satisfaction is at the core of getting rid of pornography. A human being should be treated with dignity, not as an object to be used. By the way, a woman is never responsible for her husband's use of pornography, nor is it her job to get him to stop his addiction. It is his responsibility to get help and change his behavior. Pornography is another form of adultery, and when it invades the marriage and the marital bed, trust is broken. Change is required, and repentance and forgiveness are needed for restoration, if it is even possible. There is no room for pornography in a healthy marriage and in the marriage bed. Please go to your worksheet and review item number 10. Well, we've just covered a lot of ground, so how are you feeling? What thoughts are running through your mind? Consider exploring in more depth what we've discussed today. If you are struggling in any area, know that you don't have to go it alone. Connect with a professional who can help you through the next stage of your journey to help you reach a place where you can achieve sexual fulfillment and expression of your sexual self. Well, our next session, our third session, will focus on the steps or the how-tos for the healthy expression of our sexual self. I hope you'll be able to tune in. Thank you for joining in for this session. God bless.